I think my initial connection, in a way, was to Friends of the Car rather than to the river itself. I had been an attorney in Washington, D.C. doing Clean Water Act litigation in the East for some environmental groups. And I moved back to Kansas City, where I'd grown up, in 1995, and I got to know Dave Murphy, who was the riverkeeper at the time. And I went to some Friends of the Car events, and I really liked the organization and the people. And as time went on, I got to know some more of them. I got to know Laura Caldwell when she became the riverkeeper. And at some point, some of the old board members decided to move off the board, and they wanted to find some new board members, and they put out the word that they were looking for board members. And I said, that interests me, and so I filled out an application and gave it to them, and they asked me on the board. One of the great things I think about the board of Friends of the Cause, it has a lot of different kinds of people on it, and my role, I guess, is to be, I think, is because I'm a lawyer and because I have worked with groups who are trying to keep polluters from polluting rivers. And along with that is some of the legal things about water quality. And so I've been on the Water Quality Committee, where we try to keep track of different permits that go out that KDHE or the Army Corps of Engineers issues, and keep up with that and keep up with different projects on the river. So there's the legal role, and then there's also a science role and just a kind of a lobbying role, and there are people on the board with lots of different backgrounds and talents. Well, the work I'd done in the past was filing lawsuits, and that's not what I've done, at least so far, with Friends of the Caw. Where the work I did in the past was suing polluters who violated their discharge permits. But with Friends of the Caw, what I've done is kind of used that as a background to understand what different polluters' obligations are, because I think a lot of times polluters will push the limits, and there's always the issue of whether you want to work with polluters to try to get them to improve their practices, or whether you want to confront them. And that's kind of an ongoing issue to try to figure out. I have had experiences on the river, though. And one of the first ones was actually not through Friends of the Caw, but through a friend of mine was involved in a canoe organization from Missouri. But they had a float on the Caw, a night float from Lawrence to, I think it was to Eudora. And so I went with him on that, and I think that's the first time I had been on the river. I mean, I knew about the river and had seen it many times and been over it, but that was the first time I'd been on it, and it's so beautiful, and particularly at night. And you would think it'd be hard to float at night, but in the moonlight, it was actually pretty easy to see, and we weren't far from civilization, but it felt like we were really isolated, and so beautiful. And I don't float that often, but I've floated a number of times since, and every time I'm on it, it's different, and it's always beautiful. Some of my favorite memories with Friends of the Caw are the fundraisers. I love the fundraisers that Friends of the Caw does. Both the Wild and Scenic Film Festival, that's always fascinating to see those films, and Beers of the Caw, which has been the last few years at Abe and Jake's in Lawrence. And several years ago, I volunteered pouring beer for one of the brewers, and I'd never had so much fun pouring beer in my life, and it's kind of given birth to my new ambition, maybe for my retirement, and that I'd like to be a bartender someday. So maybe Friends of the Caw made that contribution to my life. Well, I have a lot of hope for the future. It's kind of interesting to see, and I'd met some of the members of the early board, and then I'd met the past river keepers, and I think the board has kind of evolved over time and become more sort of organized. And I think that's probably a good thing as far as accomplishing things going forward, but not too organized, because if you can see my name tag, it says president. So I'm not president anymore, but I'm happy to wear a name tag that says president. So as long as the board is not too organized, I'm good with it.